Now, turning to our program, please welcome Will Rook, CEO of Versant, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you and good afternoon. First, I need to make truly a confession at the onset here about our speaker. A number of years ago, I was interviewing people at Stratec, employees, leaders, and I met Adam Gerstmeier. And honestly, he just stood apart for a number of key reasons that I think you will see shortly. First, Adam was a leader with a really positive attitude with all that was going on in the automotive industry, and it was not an easy time. He was transparent about what needed to be done, which really impressed me and many people that were working with him. He also had a sense of humor and a humanity with all of his colleagues and all of the workers, as these changes were just massive in the automotive world. But he was focused to results, and he did it in a way that I saw so many employees and so many people really follow his lead. Well, when Adam moved to Sheboygan to manage 3 facilities with a company called Nemak that I had never heard of, I was able to continue my work with Adam. Now, this is an amazing company, and it was fascinating to watch Adam, again, put some of those leadership qualities into practice with employees, with colleagues, with partners, and with their customers. So I think today you're going to learn something about this $4 billion company that many of you may not have heard of either, the auto industry, which is going through enormous changes, as you know, and particularly Nemak's commitments to Wisconsin, to the communities, and to the workforce. So please welcome Adam Gerstmeier.
All right, well, thank you very much, Will, for the introduction. And thank you to the Rotary for hosting me at this event. You know, it was very sobering walking in. I was in the car, doing work emails, and just got done with a pretty intense phone call. And then when you walk into the lobby here at the War Memorial, it's very sobering, and it makes you very appreciative of the sacrifices that many people have made here and how at times trivial some of the day-to-day work problems can be. So thank you again for hosting. And again, this is my first time here at the War Memorial, and it's an amazing venue. So $626 billion, right? That's a huge amount of money. And that is the amount of money that's going to be invested in electrification in the EV space between now and 2030. So it's a staggering amount of money. And actually, it's not a whole lot of time. So automotive programs and transportation programs, they have very long life cycles, which means the majority of this money is being invested right now today, transforming the auto industry. And we're seeing more shift in the automotive technology and the automotive industry now than we probably have at a more rapid pace in the entirety of automobiles since their inception. So Will had mentioned it, and we touched on it. Who is Nemak? The vast majority of you here probably have never heard of Nemak. I can tell you, I worked in automotive. I worked in metal casting in Milwaukee, and I had never heard of Nemak until I got a phone call from a recruiter. So we are very bad at getting our name out in the community, and we're a great, important part of the economy and the placeholder in Sheboygan. And it's a shame that we're not more well known. But Nemak is a company that we're headquartered in Monterrey, Mexico, and we have content on a quarter of the vehicles globally for both powertrain electric vehicles and vehicle structures. So the main concentration of our product is here in the United States, Mexico, and in Europe, and also in Asia. But we have a ton of product on a ton of different vehicles. So at a glance, we're a $4.7 billion organization. We have 22,000 employees. We operate in 15 countries. We have 10 product and R&D centers and 38 manufacturing sites. In our headquarters alone, we have 11,000 people that work at one facility in Monterrey, Mexico. So a huge presence, and we've been a big part of almost every major OEM since 1974, serving those industries. That's it. So getting back to us here in Wisconsin. So I had never heard of Nemak, but we are located in Sheboygan. We have 3 facilities. We do about $400 million of revenue every year out of our Sheboygan facilities. And since 2019, we've invested $158 million in new investments, new die-cast machines, CNCs, automation, robotics. So a ton of investment and commitment to the state of Wisconsin. We spend about $120 million every year just within the state. So that's our payroll, that's spending money with the suppliers and partners in the community. So again, a big portion of the economy in Sheboygan and able to contribute. And then about 1,200 employees in Sheboygan. So one of the advantages that we have in Sheboygan is that we actually melt and create our own alloys. So we buy scraps from scrap dealers in Milwaukee and other places in Wisconsin, as well as throughout the US. And then we convert that into molten aluminum, and we process about 800,000 pounds of aluminum every single day. I tried to get a placeholder of like how much that was, and in Wisconsin we tend to reference everything in terms of either beer or cheese. So 800,000 pounds of aluminum makes about 23 million beer cans. So that's how much we do every single day. Our main customers in Wisconsin: Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, and next year, Magna, and then BMW. So I wanted to maybe step back a little bit and just talk about some of the trends that we're seeing overall in the automotive industry now in 2023. We're seeing a huge shift to electrification. So here's some projections indicating the United States, China, and the EU, and then the rate of adoption of full electric vehicles, so BEV or battery electric vehicles, fully electric. So think of your Teslas or some of the Volvos or other fully electric cars that you're seeing. So in the United States, there in the bottom, we are lagging a bit behind Europe and China as well. But you'll see that about 61% of all vehicles sold by 2035 will be full EVs here in the United States. But compare that to 100% in Europe and about 90% in China. And China right now is off to an incredibly fast start when it comes to full electrification. So it is a tremendous shift towards electrification. And these are new technologies. These are, in some cases, unproven technologies that we're researching and developing these solutions as we go, but an incredible change in the automotive landscape. And for a company like us, Nemak got started in our core business for the first 45 years, 50 years, was pure gasoline and diesel powertrain. So nothing to do with hybrids, nothing to do with electrification, only gas and diesel engines. So we made engine blocks and transmission components. So very, very, very traditional type solutions for our customers. And right now we do the mainly powertrain, a little bit of EV, but you're looking at 2030, which once again is only now 6 years away, where there's a huge market for EV, and the market for the powertrain solutions itself is shrinking rapidly. So for companies like us, for many other suppliers and the OEMs themselves, we're having to redefine our business in order for us to grow and to stay relevant with the future technologies, because the landscape is changing very rapidly. Also, for a company like us, this is more on the business side. It does present opportunities. So in a current vehicle, we have about $500 to $600 in value and in components. When you look at the hybrid vehicles now, so that's with a gasoline or diesel engine and then an electric powertrain, we have generally about $700 to $1,000 in content. But then switching to the EV allows us opportunities to grow in both the structural and the EV side. So when I talk about structural, another advantage that we have is Nemak does all aluminum. So we don't do iron, we don't do steels or anything else. We do focus purely on aluminum and really pulling the weight out of the vehicles to give them more range and to give them more strength and more highly engineered solutions. So for us, moving away from engines and getting into really taking 4 or 5 different fabricated parts that are assembled, which takes a lot of labor, a lot of time, and a lot of weight, and making them out of one large single piece is the technology that we're really driving towards. So we have opportunities to grow our content on each vehicle, but the solutions are getting very large and very complex as well to migrate to those new technologies. We talked a little bit about sustainability, and I think this is really, really, really important. At Nemak and our customers, I assure you that sustainability is not a buzzword. It is something that is in the forefront of many of our conversations. And in order for us to win new work, sustainability is top of mind. So one of the interesting conversations that I had with a customer earlier in the year is that there's a lot of investment in assembly plants in the United States now. Some of the new incentives federally, USMCA, trade agreements between Mexico and Canada really favor investments in building new assembly and mining and other value stream components for EVs in the US. And one of the customers said, we have a facility in the South, and if you're not located in a certain radius of that facility, no matter how cheap your product is, we will not buy it because the carbon footprint of shipping that product to our facility is way too high. So they're really looking at carbon footprint first. And I'm not saying price is secondary, but they look at the fully loaded solution and why that is so important. So another example too is we talked about Nemak doing traditional powertrain. We can fit about 900 engine blocks in a single semi. So we can, ship those to Mexico pretty easily. We can ship those abroad pretty easily. But when we look at some of the larger components that we're now manufacturing, these like battery trays, for instance, one of the products that we make is the battery tray for the Ford Mach-E, which is the electric Mustang. We make the battery tray and that assembly for all of those vehicles. We can fit about 90 of those in one semi. So now you look at a product that we used to be able to make 900 of, now we can only fit 90 in one semi. That means you need 10 times the trucks. There's a driver shortage. There's a lot of CO2 associated with that. So that really changes how customers are looking at buying and designing our products. So that's really top of mind for us as well. And another thing too is that we must make commitments to reducing our CO2 footprint. If we do not maintain these commitments, we will lose work with our customers because they depend on us being part of their solutions to reduce CO2 footprint. So this chart, it's a bit of an eye chart, especially from where you're sitting, but we have the challenge to reduce our CO2 footprint by 2030 by 26%. And that's from 2019 baselines. And one of the challenging part of that is that is a absolute number, which means if we grow, we have to further reduce the percentage of our CO2 footprints in order to really hit the 220 plus percent reduction from our 2019 standards. So if we don't meet these commitments, that is going to be an issue for us to maintain and then win new work for the customers. So sustainability is really important to us and it's important to our customers. And I'll tell you, when we're behind closed doors and we're not in front of any customers, this is not something that we dismiss. We talk about sustainability every single day. And we are a very energy intensive business. We melt metal. We have huge equipment. We use huge compressors. So we use a lot of electricity, a lot of natural gas. And if we're not thinking about how we can reduce our CO2 footprint every single day, we're going to lose a step on our competition and we're not going to be able to provide those solutions to our customers. So this really is something that's going to be important for us and important to the industry as we move forward. But the last thing, and I want to be mindful of the time, I want to stress that at Nemak, we do a lot of great things in the city and great things in the state. But in order for us to grow and continue to be a strong member of the community, we need to establish better partnerships in the community because we can't grow alone on price or even location to the assembly plants because of CO2 footprint. We need to have stronger relationships with the community. So we are in talks at very high levels with executives from all the major OEMs. Like the largest OEMs, car manufacturers, they know where Sheboygan is because we are an important part of their supply chain. So they've been to our facility. They've stayed at Blue Harbor. They've eaten at Lino's Italian restaurant in Sheboygan. They've eaten down here. So they've been here. And when we talk about, are we going to win new programs and where are we going to build the future content of our automotive products? They ask, how are you going to do it? And who are you going to do it with? So everyone realizes the talent shortage. But we've got to figure out how can we rapidly increase the level of talent we have available. And I'm talking about talent across the board, engineering talents, of course, quality talent, financial talent, and then really hands-on and training talent. Educational talent is critical as well. So our relationships with our local universities, even middle schools and high schools at this point in time, if we cannot demonstrate the pipeline of how are we going to be relevant in 1 year and how are we going to be relevant in 5 years, that's incredibly important for us. And then having the relationships also at the local and state level. And then also the supplier network and the supporting industry. And one of the other challenges that we have, and we have a great group of people in this room, is how are we going to convince people that they want to move and live in Wisconsin and move to Sheboygan? And without that community, where are the people coming from? The unemployment rate right now in Sheboygan, They say it's like 1.2%. It feels like negative 1,000. Like it really is unbelievable how thriving the Sheboygan area is and how really difficult it is to find employment. And it's a great place to live. It's a great place to work. But we need to have a strong relationship with our community stakeholders as well to make sure that we have solutions that make it a great place to work and a great place to live and raise your kids, and also have great access to culture and other things to have fulfilling lives outside of work. So these relationships are important. And for us, the work is only going to get more difficult. The parts are only going to get more challenging. And so we need to have the solutions with our young talent, with our communities, with the state, with the local educators to make sure that we are still able to provide those solutions going forward. So that's a bit of a snapshot of Nemak and the automotive industry. Before we get into that, I did want to talk a little bit about some comments that we had prior to this started about what is going on with EVs, and maybe we're starting to see a little bit of softening on the electrification overall. So there's been a tremendous amount of investments in electrification, but I think we are starting to see sales feather back a little bit on how fast people are actually buying these solutions, and there's a lot of range anxiety. So people don't want to have an EV as their only car, or do I get it as a second car? So we are seeing OEMs now starting to look at more flexible solutions. I think hybrids are probably going to be more of a transitionary vehicle than originally anticipated, just to help solve those issues. But then again, the OEMs look to us and say, we're not quite sure exactly how many fully electric cars we're going to sell or how many gas cars we're going to sell. What we need are companies and communities that can be flexible, that can rearrange their talents and align to the needs of what we need going forward. So I think it is a bit uncertain right now, but I'll tell you, I think it's just a matter of a few years here gap of bridging that between the gas and the hybrid and electrification. But I'll tell you the things that are not going to change is the commitment to sustainability. This is really, really important stuff. And it's a tremendous amount of investment, a tremendous amount of effort. So no matter what we do, whether it's a gas vehicle, a fully electric vehicle, or a hybrid vehicle, doing it in a sustainable way is going to be critical for all of us moving forward. So with that, let's get into the Q&A.
And if you have a question for Adam, you can ask a question using this microphone here. And as a reminder, please keep your questions topical and concise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here today. I have a question about your competition.
Yes.
How do you define your particular market? Who are your major competitors, and what percentage of the market do you have?
So the question, I think everyone was able to hear about our competition. For us, what's interesting is that as we explore transitioning from just traditional powertrain to some of the larger structural parts, our competition starts to change quite a bit. And sometimes our competitions internally can even be our own customers. And so for us, it's more about finding a niche and finding what your strength is. Our strength is figuring out how to make things that were very heavy into a single piece, really strong aluminum components. And so we might compete with steel applications for bodies, and we might compete with OEMs with their own solutions. But for us, we have a pretty sizable market, especially in powertrain. So we had a very high percentage of the aluminum engine and block overall space. And now as we transition into new markets, especially like battery trays, like there is no battery tray market. It's a new market. And so in a way, we're all finding our way through this together and finding the solutions. But the important thing is that we work with the customers upfront. So when a lot of this is still not even a fully baked solution, we're able to use our engineering resources to trial and do development with them, and then develop a solution that's going to meet their needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. My name is John Ward, and I grew up in Kohler. So I spent a lot of my youth in Sheboygan.
Sure.
So I have to admit, I have seen Nemak, but I never knew what you did until today. So thank you. I also know a lot about the industrial history of Sheboygan, but I don't know the origin story of Nemak. Could you share how Nemak came to Sheboygan?
Sure. So Nemak started, there's a gentleman named John French. So JL French Corp, some of you may have heard of JL French, started JL French casting on Taylor Drive. Basically, we're in the shadow of the Acuity flagpole is one of our locations in Sheboygan. So he started that back in I think it was the 70s that the original facility was started. And so it grew just like any small business, grew and did a really nice job. And the advantage that he had was actually water. So die casting, and we do metal casting, and we need to rapidly cool things. So being close to Lake Michigan actually provided them with a huge advantage that we could use a ton of water and cool castings really quickly and grow. So he built a fantastic business. It was sold, I think, in 2006 to a couple of different companies, went through some different ownership, and then Nemak finally bought it in 2015. So that's when it became part of the Nemak portfolio. We're glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, Adam. My question revolves around how are you guys going to compete with a Tesla-type gigapress situation? Are you going down that path with very large scale, very quick cycle time castings? You'd be co-locating at manufacturers, things like that. Are you going to go down that road, or are you going to kind of stay with the smaller pieces?
Sure. So the question is on Tesla's gigacasting, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Tesla's been in the news a lot for making these humongous machines that basically cast like almost 1/3 of a car in one single piece. So a lot of the technology is still in its teething phases, and it's really exciting to see that how quickly the technology is rapidly changing and what's really possible that 15 years ago we thought probably wasn't the case. But Nemak is working with the customers in a variety of applications. We also have large presses, not maybe to quite the extent that you're seeing with Tesla. But I think at this point in time, customers have to balance how do we make large parts consistently, and also we supply many, many locations. And the challenge I mentioned, you talk about fitting 80 battery trays in a truck. Well, you might even be able to fit 3 or 4 of those single pieces now in a semi. So they have to look to say, does it make sense to have super, super large casting in one facility, or make them just slightly smaller, but then be able to use that one press to serve maybe 4 or 5 different assembly plants. So right now, it's still a lot of seeing what's really possible. And then a lot of what you're reading is still not fully vetted technology, and we're just pushing that. But I mean, there's no doubt the shift to huge castings is happening. We are installing 4,500 ton presses right now. We're actually in the middle of about a $50 million expansion just to serve existing customers, existing work. We built that in order to be able to cast the powertrain portions that we're doing now, but also be ready for that. And I saw some Mercury Marine shirts here. Mercury also does very large castings, 4,500 ton, and they're amazing at it as well. So it's fun to see the technology grow.
Well, speaking of growing, my table mate told me at lunch that Amazon announced a collaboration with Hyundai, and they are about to start selling cars via Amazon.
Okay.
Which you don't know about that?
I've not bought the car.
Hot off the presses.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Well, I think, I think the changes in the auto industry overall and how cars are purchased, and also, are we going to more of a ride share? What's the learning curve on autonomous vehicles? That's really for us very interesting to follow. I think the advantage that we have as a company is that we would make products that will go on any of those type applications. So for us, again, we're scalable, whether it's going to be 0% ownership, fully ride share, autonomous solutions, fully autonomous, anything like that. For us, our customer, the OEM, still stays the same. So I think it's more interesting to see how that technology plays out. I've not heard about the Amazon purchase yet, but it's interesting to watch. I mean, we've seen Carvana and other models as well change how people buy used cars. And I think the consumer confidence will increase as we get used to this different ways of buying versus the dealerships from even 5 years ago. It's really changing rapidly. So we'll see.
Thank you. My name is Natraj. My question is, have you explored micro factories, and do you have any thoughts on that?
So the question is, have we explored micro factories? We are still in a point where having a critical mass in some areas is beneficial for us. An example, too, is micro factories may mean setting smaller factories closer to the assembly plants to reduce a lot of the shipping that we talked about. But one of the things I mentioned is we do our own alloying. So we melt 800,000 pounds of aluminum a day. That requires some scale as well. And so that's something that doesn't quite scale out as nicely. But we have looked at overall, when we win work, a typical automotive program runs anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And basically, you buy assets mainly dedicated to some of these lines. So for us, it's always a conversation of where is the customer, what's the program, how long is it needed for, and then how can we best service that customer, but also have flexibility, because we even see changes, and you'll read about it in any of the Wall Street Journal or anything else, that the customers, as customers or end customers demand shifts, and they go, we're going to buy a lot of pickup trucks, and now we're going to go to a light vehicle. Those assembly plants are different. So if they commit too much to maybe one location production-wise, and all of a sudden a different assembly plant gets more of the work, then you're kind of committing your supply chain. So I think having still some flexibility in those regions is important. And right now we have 4 plants in the U.S., and we're committed to those 4 plants.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. As a passionate EV owner, I love having my gas station in my garage. What is the future with Nemak and potentially trucks, heavy trucks on the roads? Because that's really the other large part of emissions issues.
Sure. Right now, our traditional customers have been just like the light passenger vehicles. And by that, I mean cars and we call light trucks, but your F-150s, F-250s, Super Duties, and the GM equivalents. So that is a strong market for us. It's also a market that we're a higher volume type manufacturer, so that those models blend well for us. But we don't have a whole lot of heavy truck space now. But again, we've seen a lot of advancement in the space. Volvo, Mercedes, even Tesla in some cases have been getting involved in the semi industry as well. So it's interesting to watch. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I meant making parts for them. I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood your question. But again, I think the trucking industry for us, it's important. It's important to our customers too. Mainly, like a lack of drivers is a challenge, right? And we have a lot of semis. We get, I think, 30 semis just of raw material that delivers to us every day. So we ship out of hundreds of semis every single day. And that's why logistics is so important, because if you have driver shortages or schedule challenges, automotive factories operate on just in time. So they need to get their products multiple times per day. And so that industry is something that they're watching closely, which again is why locations to these assembly plants is important to reduce the burden on the overall trucking industry. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting. You were a company I didn't know about either, so I thought I knew Sheboygan. You talked about workforce, and COVID has kind of taught us that the existing system of education, training, et cetera, might be outmoded. We need to flip the mindset. So if we flip the mindset on training and education from your industry standpoint, what does the better system look like, and what's the role for your company in flipping the mindset on education and training?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Training for us, I will tell you, has never been more important than it has now. We have, like many companies, we have a very skilled workforce. We have very highly engineered equipment, and the equipment that we use is not something that you would typically see outside of our plants or maybe Mercury Marine, for instance, right? And so we have to build those skills in-house. And I think we all lost a step in the industry where there was a gap where we have now a retirement liability, and we don't have that mid kind of bench of talent. So we're really focused on rapidly upskilling as much as possible and getting back to the basics, and getting back to true workforce development and hands-on training. Actually, I was just in Poland about 2 weeks ago for that exact reason. The European plants that we have in our European colleagues, they've always had a stronger industrial training system than we have. And it's unfortunate we got away from that. So I went back to Poland to say, how are you guys training your people? How are you doing your skills? How are you validating and developing that talent pipeline? They're a step ahead of us right now. So we're bringing a lot of that back too. But in the end, it's working with the educational institutions, working even at the middle school level. What skills do you need to be successful, whether it's in robotics, whether it's tool and die, or being an electromechanic technician or an engineer or whatever. But we need more of those practical skills at the workplace. And then we are also spending significantly more money in our own building, in our own 4 walls, focusing on training. So millions of dollars spent just with our own training that we wish we would have done 20 years ago. But we're doing that now because we have to rapidly upskill. We have 1,200 people, And we want to make sure that we have the skills needed to support, especially increasing technology and increasing automation. Thank you.
I heard a presentation by the Economist magazine that was talking about the prices of electric vehicles, and they, in their view, the sweet spot in pricing for U.S. manufacturers in the $50,000 to $60,000 range, whereas the Chinese apparently are focusing more on the $30,000 range, which would seem to be more mass market. Could you comment on that?
I probably don't have as good of an answer as the Economist presentation that you saw on that. I think for us, of course, again, price is critical. And I think when we look at the type of content we're making, one of the solutions that our customers are looking at us to help find is they would have an assembly that used to have 4 or 5 or 6 different parts. And that means 4 or 5 different suppliers, having to join them all together, having a very high labor content. And we're looking at simplifying and saying, how can we make 4 or 5 or 6 of these parts that were sourced from all over the country or all over the world in some case, and can we make it in one part, in one shot, talking about the large die-cast machines earlier. And the goal for that, of course, is to bring down the cost. So I think the OEMs realize that right now electrification is not selling at levels they wanted to because of the pricing, and they're looking to drive down and figure out how can we make this more affordable. But right now there still is a gap between how expensive the materials are needed to get the range, and because Americans too, we want longer range than I think they do in other countries, right? So we're used to be able to drive 300-400 miles on a tank of gas and be able to fill up, where maybe they don't have that same requirements, or at least the customers don't demand that same requirement in other countries as well. So I think for us, it's really how can we build solutions that mimic the way we operate our vehicles today, and do it for the best price. And right now, I still think we're a little too high on that price curve to get that mass adoption that you're talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being here today. Is there a standard industry formula for calculating carbon footprint, or does it vary manufacturer by manufacturer? And is there a resource where we can see how it's calculated?
There is. So I am not the best person to speak on that, but there are independent agencies that do rate the carbon emissions. So that's where, when you look at the carbon neutrality acts, they're all done at a single global standard. And so they want to have an even playing field, because otherwise it's just too subjective. And so our customers have actually very complex formulas that we have to follow. And so there is standards out there. I'm not sure how they're calculated, but I do know that they are done, and they're managed by third parties as well to make sure we have an even playing field. Yeah, I think really what we do is we look at each project as a whole, and then we calculate our entire proposal to our customer, and they take that information. So they look at our distance, our manufacturing facilities, locations to their plants, that sort of thing. So that's something that we submit our proposal, and they use that information for their own analysis. Yep.
Hi, Brian Wallace from Mercury Marine. My question, you talked a bunch about talent pipeline, and getting people in your company. My question is focused on when you maybe have a new engineer or a new person you've hired, what sort of programs or mentorship do you instill or put in place to kind of make sure that they stay for 5 years, 10 years, a long-term employee? How do you sort of keep them and engage them?
Sure.
Once they're already part of your company.
Yeah. So I think first, to get them in the door and stay, we have to be competitive from a wage standpoint. So in Sheboygan, our entry-level wage, walking in the door with zero experience whatsoever, is $24.30 for just entry-level labor. On top of that, you get I think maybe we just had a contract, at least 2 weeks vacation and health benefits immediately. And that's for just the standard hourly employee. And then upwards, you can make, $40 an hour as an hourly employee. So that's just from the pay standpoint. And pay is not what keeps people at your facility by any stretch, but that's what first gets them in the door. We are really focused on our workforce engagements. So servant leadership is maybe a term that you've heard before. Servant leadership is probably the most important thing that we're doing at our facility right now. it is our responsibility to make sure that we're setting our workforce up for success. I think in the past, we failed and many companies have failed by throwing your new employees to the wolves and hoping that they'll be successful. We realized that we need to really make an objective curriculum. How do we make sure that these individuals have the skills? And I think for a long time, we used like a on-the-job training where you're just with somebody. But that really varied. Like the quality of your training would vary from person to person. Some people are really great trainers and some people know a lot, but they're not great trainers. And it's hard to quantify how good of a job did we really do onboarding this individual. So I mentioned we're spending a lot of money and effort on training. A big part of this is how do we make really our own curriculum to say you've had these skills, you have this engagement, and then we have just methods to follow up with these workforce on a daily, a weekly, and a monthly, and a yearly schedule to make sure you have the information you need. Is there any recommendations you have? And again, I know this is basic, but I think we all struggle to do this in the operations or manufacturing world, is really leveraging the knowledge of the employees to make sure that their good ideas are getting implemented and that they're engaged. Because in the end, like the people on the floor, they have the best ideas. They're the ones touching our product every day. They're the ones operating this equipment. They're where 95% of your good ideas come from. I mean, engineers are great, but engineers you're stuck on conference calls and in your office for, 5 out of 7 hours, 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day or more. And so really working with those employees to make sure that we're engaged. But I think it's going back to your question, having an objective way to train them and onboard them, and then having that subjective empowerment engagement touch points is critical for us. And we've really focused a lot on that in the last 18 months, and we're starting to gain some traction there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. A great presentation. Had a couple questions that have more to do about sustainability.
Yep.
And then also more about the influence that Nemak has with their customers and also with building out infrastructure for charging stations throughout the country, because I think that may be one of the main reasons why people are kind of like lagging in sales or purchasing EVs. And so what are your thoughts on that, or if your organization has influence on that in regards to building up a stronger infrastructure? And then do you have influence with your customers in regards to mining of batteries with foreign entities, for example, like in China and all that? There's a lot of health concerns and human rights, violations in regards to batteries. So are there any ways that you can influence your customers in regards to the supply chain for that?
Sure. Yeah, no, from our standpoint, we really focus on the engineering side. So they come up with their new design for the next generation vehicles. Oftentimes we are just given previews of the components, not even quite sure the applications at times, but we designed the end product. But as far as like the charging infrastructure, that's essentially well beyond the scope of what we do. They come to us and say, this is the technology we're focusing on. These are the vehicles that we're interested in building. Can you help us provide some solutions for this? But that's for us, the charging scope and even like the battery sourcing is well beyond the scope of what we work on. But thanks for the question. I know it's a hot topic, and I guess real quick, just touching on that though, with the USMCA and the new trade agreements, they really are giving significant tax incentives to do battery sourcing here in the U.S. So the amount of mining and then supporting infrastructure for mining alone in the U.S. has skyrocketed because of the administration's tax policies and tax credit options out there for those companies. So you are seeing a significant more amount of batteries being shored back to the U.S., but I don't have any insight beyond that. Thanks.
Jonathan Murray, Kellogg 2000. I heard you talk about the importance of the carbon footprint to your competitive advantage.
Yep.
I heard you talk about the role of the community to sustaining an advantage. Could you elaborate a little more on the need for access to, I'm going to call it green electrons, green power coming from the community grid? Is that going to help you, hurt you? And what's the roadmap for that?
Sure. Yeah, we've seen it. Of course, there's a lot of talk on the electrical grid. Electricity is an incredibly important part of the stability of our business and the accessibility of electricity. Like we've seen times when the temperatures either drop or skyrocket, that the existing energy infrastructure really is taxed, and we get notified, and there's risks of interruptions at times too. So that's important for us. But really, how we tackled, and maybe I could just flip to this slide here. Yeah, here we go. Okay, just a portion of our business. We're focused on two things. One is reducing our overall energy. Two, is improving the efficiency of equipment, and then 3 is accessibility of renewable energies. So we're exploring really every avenue that we can, and not only just from our Wisconsin footprint, but also from our facilities across the globe. So renewable energy is critical, but we've got to figure out a way to reduce our consumption first. So how can we get more efficient compressors? How can we melt more efficiently? How can we be smarter about how we use electricity? And then is there ways that we can access clean power? Yes.
So is it fair to say that Wisconsin gave you a more green grid, a more competitive company to Wisconsin compared to Poland or some other countries?
I don't know if I'd want to necessarily. Yeah, so the question was, if Wisconsin gave us a more green grid, would that help us be more competitive? I think that I think all that is probably evaluated as part of our overall bid packages, because we do, once again, have energy commitments and sourcing commitments that overall as a company we're responsible for. So it's done as a global basis, not as a site basis.
So my question was basically going to be the same as his, but I will add a little bit extra. When it comes to like types of energy you're using right now, you mentioned that you're using a lot of natural gas. And are you also still using a little bit of coal and whatever's up in Sheboygan? How does that work?
So our primary energy inputs are electricity and natural gas. I know there's a coal power plant in Sheboygan that I think was extended for a couple more years, but that's really independent of us. I mean, we purchase electricity, and the electricity generation is beyond what we can select. But for us, we supply and source power from our supplier. But that Alliant Energy is where we get our energy from. They do have power generation that's a mixed source. So I do know they have a component of green energy as well within their value stream.
So 3 questions. One is, you talked about recycled aluminum. Is that a sustainable long-term issue? Second is, has the internal combustion part of your business benefited from the lightweighting you're doing in the electric automobile business? And the third is, I know JL French is right next to a railroad. When does railroad become a component of transportation, which requires fewer drivers and fewer employees, and has the great ability to go single source from point A to point B?
Sure. You might have to help me on the order of that again. So question 1 is recyclable aluminum first.
Right. Is that sustainable or?
Yeah. So just 100% of the aluminum that we make in Sheboygan is recycled. 100%. So everything is brought from scrap yards, and aluminum is a byproduct of shredding cars. A lot. That's where you get it. We're also, radiators and that kind of thing. We get copper from, that sort of thing. But we buy all shreddings and all scrap and all secondary alloy, and that's what we alloy in Sheboygan.
So the myth that nobody recycles is a myth. You benefit from us putting our waste in recycling.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's once again 100% of aluminum. So I think from that standpoint, Sheboygan has one of the smallest CO2 footprint from an alloy standpoint of any facility in the globe, because not all facilities have access to 100% recycled material, but we do. So it's a huge advantage from a CO2 standpoint for us. So it's really great. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And actually, I didn't mention it in this presentation, but we use 100% recycled aluminum at our facility. And then you help me out with the second question.
A.O. Smith used to use trains to ship auto parts.
Yeah.
When does Nemak start using trains to ship auto parts?
So we use rail as part of our network now. We don't have a hub in Sheboygan, but the semis will go to like rail yards in Chicago and then load there. But actually, the way our customers will dictate the transportation method, so it's really on them to drive how they want to pull their product. But I do know a good amount of our content makes it onto a rail yard, which is not in Sheboygan. It's loaded up in Chicago. Because we ship to not only the U.S., but we ship, a lot of our customers are in Mexico. We have customers in Sheboygan. We have customers in Turkey, in South Africa. We have customers in China as well. And so we have customers all over the globe, but rail is used as a big portion to ship our product to Mexico as well. So we do use it. It's just at a different loading point.
Thanks. Yeah, and then is your lightweighting in electric vehicles benefiting your internal combustion side?
Yeah, it's all tied together. I mean, we have lightweighting in internal combustion because no matter whether it's electric vehicles or internal combustion gas or diesel, you still want more fuel economy. And so gas, diesel, and electric vehicles will all benefit from lighter weights. So for us, lightweight is critical regardless of the powertrain, and getting good structural parts. Like there's a lot of high performance sports cars and high performance vehicles that use gas engines, but aluminum structural components for the strength and the weight savings. So lightweighting is what we do regardless of powertrain.
So you do talk about supply chains, but I don't see scope 3 in your chart. So is the magnitude of emissions far less compared to the other? That's why you don't have it?
Yeah, I mean, right now, because we still are really on the cusp of this full transition to the net zero path that our OEMs have defined, the focus right now is on scope 1 and 2. And so that's where we're going to be continuing to measure, and that's the driver of our customers is the first 1 and 2 scopes. So 113. Thank you guys very much for hosting. I really appreciate it.